Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at Libya put to the test 2 weeks after the September 11th attacks against the consulate in Benghazi that left 4 killed, including the U.S. ambassador. With us to talk about it from Tripoli, Mohammed Abu Sidra. He's the mediator between the Libyan government and the hardline Ansar al-Sharia brigade. From Washington, political scientist and author Walid Fares, currently acting as well as a foreign policy advisor to Mitt Romney's campaign. Here in the studio, Pierre Connaissant, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute Sciences Po, and France 24 International Affairs editor Douglas Herbert. We're talking about the reactions inside of Libya. Before the break, Mohammed Abu Sidra saying how even Ansar al-Sharia expressed its regret over what happened in Benghazi 2 weeks ago. Here's what Libya's interim president said Monday in New York, ahead of the UN General Assembly. This in an apology speech to Hillary Clinton.
Of course, we are ready to cooperate with the US government for the investigation and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Madam Secretary, I will also take this opportunity to reaffirm that what happened on the 11th of September to these US citizens does not express in any way the Libyan people's beliefs, their aspirations, their hopes, or their sentiments towards the American people.
Mohammed Abu Sidra, what's your reaction to those words? Is the interim president handling this right?
Well, I think he said the fact that we are ready to help and to cooperate to come to a conclusion that will be justified, that will be just and justify any kind of reasons that could be directed to certain group whosoever. We are here to build our state on basis of good relationships with the whole world, which we expect from a kind of a mutual respect, especially for our symbols. And no matter whatever happened, to come to the killing of a human being, never, even more if it is an ambassador who represents his country, that is a disaster which we wouldn't agree upon and we wouldn't accept.
And is Tripoli right to say that, like they did on Monday, that from now on the law and order in Benghazi is going to be under the command of Tripoli?
Sorry, what was that, under the command of Tripoli?
Libya's military command appointing a pair of army officers to head 2 of the militias in the east of the country on Monday, saying Benghazi's under their control. Were those the right moves to make?
Well, that they have already appointed 2 officers who are very well known, and those who have taken part in the revolution against Gaddafi, and they fought in the front lines, and they are trusted by both by the army and by the revolutionaries themselves. So this means that the revolutionaries themselves, I heard from them by myself, they are ready to join. They are ready to go under the control and direction of General Mangoush and the rest of the high-ranks officers in the Libyan army. But the problem is that the blame should be directed to the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Interior Affairs, and also to the Prime Minister, who have not accelerated the operation of including those people in the army and in the police. They're ready. They have no objection.
All right, let me ask Walid Fares about this, because that is a major point that's been brought up. It seems like, looking from the outside looking in, like in Libya, all sides are for consensus as long as everybody gets a slice of the cake. How should the government in Tripoli handle things right now?
Look, it is very normal that those forces, they call themselves Katiba, they also call themselves brigades. In view of international law, if they're not part of the chain of command of the Libyan army, they are militias at the end of the day, or armed groups at the end of the day. But nevertheless, those forces want to integrate the army as a force so that they would have political influence. It's up to the Libyans to decide. So far, in the international community, we recognize the president, the parliament, the armed forces of that country. Those militias, in view of international law, basically are not on the map. There should be a process, that's true, by the government to disarm them and then to integrate those who want to be part of the army and of the internal security forces. But to hear that the brigades, quote unquote, are the revolution and the government is the government, well, the government was also the revolution. The revolution ended when Gaddafi was gone. So now there needs to be an international support to that government so that that government can extend sovereignty and law and order to all parts of Libya, not just in Benghazi, to the south, to the east, to the west.
So how do you sort out the hardliners? There's opposite opinions in two of the British newspapers this Tuesday. In the Financial Times, the lead editorial, I can read it to you here, the government should stand firm. Those responsible for Mr. Stevens' death must be held to account, as should those involved in Sufi attacks. There have been attacks on Sufi shrines in the capital, Tripoli, most notably. But in an op-ed piece in The Guardian, political scientist Ranj Aladdin says banning hardline groups only opens a new can of worms. That will compound existing security problems because it will mean militias could switch to operating as small units instead of larger groups that are more easily identified and targeted. The government could still try to eliminate the militias in their new form, but this would imply that the government's abandoning the idea of a reconciliatory process in favor of direct armed confrontation. Pierre Conessa, what do you do? Do you bring in hardliners into the fold, or do you crack down?
Well, we in France had the same problems, just after the liberation in 1945, when General de Gaulle tried to call, to Franc-Tireurs Patriotes to give back their armaments, etc.
Everyone had a gun in their home, basically.
Yeah, and it was in a way, there were militias in France, exactly the same situation. So I think that our friend in the United States doesn't know what means a revolutionary situation, which means that a new government has a lot of problems to manage, to face and to deal with, which means that the militia are a problem. Well, in one point in which I seems a little bit surprised by the analysis of our Libyan friends is that it's quite difficult to explain that it was a responsibility of Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs because they were not they put not that file in an emergency situation. No, just remember that the attack on the embassy was the case of Ansar al-Sharia militia. We don't have to find internal problems of Libya. That's the first point. And the second point is that you have to disarm this militia, and that's quite difficult. That means that there will happen a lot of fights in Libya in the days coming. If the policy of the government is to investigate, to find the responsible, it won't be a peaceful process.
A comment from a viewer on the France 24 Debate Facebook page, Bruno from Nantes in eastern France, western France, saying, the only solution is a strong authority, but this can be misunderstood as a return to dictatorship, so this must be done in a way that makes them part of the country, a way of saying, you're important for the country, but you must obey the law. Walid Fares, there's another point perhaps that we tend to overlook here, and that is that there wasn't really an army as such under Muammar Gaddafi.
Well, basically, now that there is an army, even if it's a small army, the choice is very simple. Either that army is going to negotiate with other armies, and end up like the situation in Lebanon where you have the army and Hezbollah, or in Iraq where the militias are still on, or the central government is going to bit by bit with an international support, and why not even a regional support, reconquer its own land. That does not mean, and there's a lot of confusion in the debate about it, that we're going to go and disband those movements. There's a difference between a movement, Salafi, Ansar Sharia, whatever they want, and a militia. We need to basically disarm them, but then give them the right to run for elections. There were elections in Libya. What did they gain in the parliament? So the logic of we're going to maintain our weapons till we gain politically inside the system, then you're going to have a situation where you're going to have two states, the legitimate state and the militia state.
Mohammed Abu Sidra, when you speak to Ansar al-Sharia, do they agree that, do they recognize that disarmament is in the very near future for them?
Well, the subject is that we have to know that to include and integrate these brigades into the army, we have to find and to put in practice four main points. First of all, we should have an army. In fact, to be frank, as yet in Libya, we don't have the real army to which we can invite people to join. The other thing is that for the Islamists, especially Sharia, Ansar al-Sharia, for Sharia, the Islamic law, to be considered in practice as a frame of reference. The third thing, also for those people to join, is to clean the army from those who are still loyal to Gaddafi, because some of them were torturing them in prisons and everywhere they find them, and they were attacking their houses.
When you say, sorry, let me just interrupt you. When you say for them to have Sharia as practice, do you mean as Sharia so that they can practice it in the areas that they administer for all of Libya? What does that mean?
Well, listen, for Sharia to be a frame of reference, this is a request for all Libyans. All of them, all the Libyans are asking for that to be included in the constitution and to be seen in practice life. This is what we are aiming for. And to talk about Sharia as a frame of reference, simply we mean that we should not accept any law or any constitutional rule that contradicts with our Sharia, with this Islam, with Quran, with our Sunnah. When that happens, then Ansar al-Sharia and all of the brigades will go to join the army, the police, and to work in all the different parts of the government, because they will see it as a religious duty to do so, to join, as long as Sharia has been implied, because we have to obey our leaders as long as they have considered this Sharia as a frame of reference.
Pierre Connaissat, your reaction to this?
I think that the situation in Libya is more confusing that our friend is explaining. I understand that he will use religious arguments, he will use some political arguments, etc. But in fact, when people and militia are implemented somewhere, it's quite difficult to disarm them. Even if you promise that you will include, they will join the army. Which army? The question, the point was exactly. I mean, they were the former Benghazi, the former Gaddafi supporters. They are the new militants, which have no military formation training, which means. And I think that we'll face probably months and months of turmoil in Libya.
All right, so before we go, because we're running short on time, we've talked about Libyan politics a lot. I just want to talk about American politics. Now, at the UN this Tuesday, Barack Obama, in that speech, making the death of the ambassador to Libya this a central tenet, he made it the speech about universal values and the fight against intolerance.
Today, we must declare that this violence and intolerance has no place among our United Nations.
And while in his speech, Obama put the accent on the Libyans who changed their Facebook photo to that of the killed U.S. ambassador, his challenger, Republican Mitt Romney, painted a much more hostile picture of the Muslim world in a campaign speech Monday in Colorado.
He said the developments in the Middle East are bumps in the road. Yeah, that was my reaction. Bumps in the road. We had an ambassador assassinated. We had a Muslim Brotherhood member elected to the presidency of Egypt. 20,000 people have been killed in Syria. We have tumult in Pakistan. And of course, Iran is that much closer to having the capacity to build a nuclear weapon.
Douglas Herbert?
Look, I mean, Mitt Romney has come under tremendous fire and criticism, even within his own Republican camp, for his initial response to this, which we'll remember, condemning in the midst of, what was seen as an American tragedy. A lot of people saw it as a cheap use to gain some cheap political points. You get the sense sometimes, someone might look at that, what he just said, and say it looks like he's going down talking points that he was briefed on, and once again trying to seize on this issue as a lightning rod.
But the central point being that the Muslim world world doesn't like Americans.
The fact of the matter is there's been tremendous upheaval in the Muslim world right now, and I think he's painting in broad brush strokes a situation which is much more nuanced and complicated. And just in Libya alone, the images we saw this week, which we haven't talked about yet, of the thousands of Libyans who marched holding those signs, basically saying, "We're friends of America. We have nothing against you. We are ashamed." A little bit, we're holding our heads down at what we have seen here. This does not represent us or the way we feel. And I was just going to make a reference to what your guest was saying before, that basically most Libyans, I would say the majority of Libyans, probably do not want to see Sharia law applied in Libya. So I think it's painting with a very broad brushstroke to say they are. And I think it's very easy to seize on this issue and paint it as a very fearsome, negative thing, and ignore some of the positive aspects and the positive forces that are definitely right now arising and at work in Libya, especially among the younger generation.
All right, and we're almost out of time, but I will give the final words in the interest of equal time to Walid Fares on this point. What did you think about Barack Obama's speech this Tuesday?
Well, let me begin with the other side. It's very easy for the anti-Romney, pro-Obama media machine to paint everything Romney says as incredibly unprofessional, while the president at the United Nations was completely abstract. He did not actually mention who was aggressing in Libya. He did not mention that in Egypt the Salafists are now moving to become part of the government. He did not mention the civil war final resolution in Syria. So this is a debate among Americans, and Romney is not the president of the United States. He's the head of the opposition, while the president of the United States needs to give more tangible answers than the ones he gave at the United Nations.
All right, and we're unfortunately going to leave it there. I see Pierre Connaisseur shaking his head, but we ran out of time, unfortunately. Pierre, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Douglas Herbert. I want to thank Walid Fares in Washington and Mohamed Abu Sidra for joining us from Tripoli. And thank you, of course, for being with us here in the France 24 debate.